reader is the great Jerome Rothenberg, and to introduce him is his friend and our colleague, Paul Portugues. So please give them both a warm welcome.
Thank you all for coming. I didn't know I was going to introduce Jerome, but if you don't know who Jerome Rothenberg is, then you're not aware of 20th century poetry. Not only is he a great poet, but he's also a great theoretician of poetry. I first came across his work when he's done many anthologies. Most famous are two, which if you haven't read them, they're kind of like the basis of 20th century poetics, especially post-1950. It's called Technicians of the Sacred and Shaking the Pumpkin. They're translations or reworkings or whatever of Aboriginal society poetry from all over the world, from Africa, all over the world. Shaking the Pumpkin is mostly indigenous American Indian, Amerindian poetry and stuff like that. If you haven't read those or don't know about them, go to the library immediately. It's become incredibly influential on all post-1950 poets, including Gary Snyder and Allen Ginsberg, and they carried those books around as though they were Bibles and stuff. Jerome also has published umpteen hundreds of books of his own poetry. He's one of the original published poets from City Lights Books, which published a lot of Allen Ginsberg and Lawrence Ferlinghetti and whatnot. He did one of the original series of their translation series. He's also known as a very great translator from about every language you could think of. And he is also incredibly respected, in my opinion, awed by people like me, minor poets, in terms of the influence he's had on theory of poetry or poetics in particular. When I was writing my book on Ginsberg, The Visionary Poetics of Allen Ginsberg, that's all I talked about with Jerry Rothenberg. I had to cut out half of those references because that's the kind of influence that he had. And I hope in the workshop, which he's going to teach tomorrow morning at 10:30 in the art gallery. That's where it is, right, Caroline? Yeah. I hope he talks about some of his theories of poetry, including the deep image, which you may or may not know about, and theory of history. He'll reference a lot of his mentors, like Ezra Pound in particular, and some of the world poets that you may or may not be aware of. Maybe from your class, they're learning some of the world poets, and from my class on Asian poetry in the spring, you'll learn people you should know, like Li Bai and Du Fu and whatnot. So without further ado, let me introduce one of the truly great contemporary writers, poets, translators, and storytellers in American literature, Jerome Rothenberg.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to read mostly from this book, which came out during the last year, called Eye of Witness, a Jerome Rothenberg Reader. And it's more than a selected poetry. It's selected poems and prose writings and performance pieces and visual pieces, and so it makes up a big book that's a little like those anthologies that Paul was just speaking about. And it goes back over a long period of time, back into the 1950s, early 1960s. Back then, we were discovering or rediscovering the possibilities of poetry. And a number of us got into the writing of manifestos, declarations of what poetry is or should be about. And I'll start with, I wrote little mini manifestos. And I'll start with a manifesto from 1964 in 4 parts. 1, I will change your mind. 2, any means equals methods to that end. 3, to oppose the devourers equals bureaucrats, system makers, priests, etc. William Blake. And 4, from Jesus Christ to his disciples in the apocryphal Acts of St. John. And if thou wouldst understand that which is me, know this, all that I have uttered, all that I have said, I have uttered playfully, and I was by no means ashamed of it. So the book begins, as my first book began, with a quotation from William Blake. And Paul assures me that nobody knows who William Blake is. But from the late 18th to the first 30 years or so of the 19th century, great visionary poet, from a work called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. By degrees we beheld the infinite abyss, fiery as the smoke of a burning city. Beneath us at an immense distance was the sun, black but shining. Round it were fiery tracks which flew, fiery tracks on which revolved vast spiders crawling after their prey, which flew or rather swam in the infinite deep in the most terrific shape of animals sprung from corruption, and the air was full of them and seemed composed of them. These are devils and are called powers of the air. I now asked my companion, which was my eternal lot? He said, between the black and white spiders. And so we begin with a small poem called A Little Boy Lost, a title that's taken from William Blake. They took me from the white sun, and they left me in the black sun, left me to sleep among long rows of overcoats. I was a city boy lost in the country. A wound in my hand was all I knew about willows. Can you understand? Do you hear the wide sound of the wind against the cow's side and the crickets that run down my sleeve, crickets full of the night with bodies like little black suns? Try as I will, there is only this cry in my heart, this cry. They took me from the white sun, and they left me in the black sun, and I have no way of turning now, no door. And this is a poem from about the same time that I overlooked. It didn't turn up in any books until a few years ago when I did a book of uncollected poems and found it again. Actually, 2 poems. It's called The Light Bulb and the Cockeyed Queen of Poland. And Poland will figure large in later poems of mine, but yeah, that takes some time before I get around to that. The light bulb and the cockeyed Queen of Poland. There is something following you. But when I looked behind me, the 2 women pointed. At what? The sun in the bowl isn't cautious. Why should she wonder? No dignity in that. My shoes? A turn of the lock equal death. The 2 women pointed. There is something following you. The sun in the bowl isn't cautious. When I look behind me, a turn of the lock equaled death. No dignity in that. The 2 women pointed. At what? There is something following you. My shoes? A turn of the lock equaled death. Why should she wonder? The 2 women pointed. At what? The light bulb and the cockeyed Queen of Poland. No dignity in that. How tragic it is to be a king and live in a palace and never have time to be gay. Because back in 1961, gay was not in, had different meaning. But, okay to take it in any way. How tragic it is to be a king and live in a palace and never have time to be gay. Something about it was sad. You could tell it was sad. Either the king or the queen or myself was mad, but something was sad. It was terribly sad. It was wrong. You could tell it was wrong. The king had been ailing for days, so loud and so long that his ermine robe couldn't take any more and blew out its spots. Oh, yes, it was sad. It was ridiculous, too. At first, it was sad, and second, it was wrong, and third, it was cold. It was terribly cold. It was coldest under the throne. It was everything under the throne. I think, said the queen, it is mice. I think it is rain, said the king. I think it is night. It is oddly and strangely like night. The hand of the moon, the hand on my shoulder is white. It is terribly white. It is wrong. The queen ran into my bed. The chamberlain stood by the door. The king tripped over the floor. He fell down and landed head last on my canopy. I think, said the queen, it's the king. I think it's the spring, said the king. I think it's the wind. It sounds like the wind. It is oddly and strangely the wind. It is oddly and strangely like night, or the rain, or the wind. I'm sure, said the king, it's the wind. I'm sure, said the queen, it's the king. After she said it, they carried him out. After she said it again, they brought him back in. He was too thin to laugh, so he cried. He was too fat to fart, so he died. And we buried him under a royal bed of the queen's own favorite royal begonias, except for his head sticking out of the ground like a flower. And then we wept. Christ, how we wept. Buckets we wept. It's sad, said the queen. And it was. And this is from a series of poems called Conversations. There were 15 of them. They were written for two voices. Of course, I will do both the voices. Conversation 6. What's in a name? Sounds. How many sounds is what I want to know. I never count sounds. Do you count strokes? No, I count resolutions. Count one now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That sounds like a long resolution. Yes, resolutions are forever long. Conversation 7. I am building a machine. Let me see it. Here it is. Where does this piece go? Behind this piece. Where does a window go to look at the machine? It goes alongside the machine. Is the machine going to be standing on this floor? No, in this field. I want to write my name in the middle of your field. My field is a machine. Can I cross it? No. I want to sit on your machine then. No, machines can break. Conversation 15. I wanted something to eat. I wanted nothing. I wanted a place for resting and another place for the pleasures of sleep. I wanted the joys of charity. I wanted the weather. I wanted you. Were you hungry? No. Were you remarkable? No. I was remarkable and was never hungry. I wanted hands. I wanted to be free of touch. I wanted my hands to be tied to the side of your body. I wanted your body to be tied to the side of my house. I was an animal and was never free. I wanted the vindication of the just. Who are those voices that are speaking to me? this was written, I think, yeah, written during the Vietnam War. But it sets it differently. You know, I know it was written during the Vietnam War. And it came as part of a series of poems I was writing, having begun to look again at the paintings, abstract paintings, of the Armenian-born painter, American painter, Arshil Gorky. And taken by the paintings, but also by the titles. And this one is after a title of Gorky's, Child of an Idumean Night. Idumean is for the land of Edom in the Old Testament. The others, the outsiders. You know, so there are Old Testament things that come into it. And it's in 3 parts. I, the fat god, I, the good gardener, deposit me in your heart and go to war gaily. Be a singer to Philistia and carry an American flag to the border. O Jerusalem, O city of mechanics, covered with hair of fire, beard against beard, a row of tigers stands here. Be holy, I say, write on water. Become the first architect, be father of your race, and let men fuck your beard. 2. I, tallow, I, voice of Holocaust, I, crystal, I, open door, I, decimal, I, winter solstice, I, willow, I, dancer, I, wind udder, I, parchment, I, avatar, I, shoe, I, harmonica, I, tongue of doves, I, emblem, I, regiment, I, globus, I, pustule, I, tooth, I, tumescence, I, father of tractors, I, who swallow the dead, I, who die, I, who shit with the jackal, I, who swell. 3. They walk, eyes in chest, believing their peace, their warm days, they burrow, they call me master, they say, and we dream, master, master, candle with how many wicks, destroyer, worshiper, God of the Tsars, old father, old language the fathers spoke and wrote it in brass, and that was the testament in brass, and there were other testaments and iron, and still other testaments, and still other old languages, and I wallowed, and I bathed in the heavy water, master, master, I was firm and substantive, I showed myself, I labeled this part hair and that part tendon, and I reached between my legs, I grew fat, I became the father of my race, my wide hips in the dust, my heart was with the children, believing their peace, their warm days, and still other testaments, I bellowed, I spat, I made thunder, I was first before the Senate, someone called me master, master, child of an Idumean night, possessor, murderer, first to sit on the stone, to ride the locomotive and be lost, and to proclaim the kingdom, and to be lost again, and swollen again, and fattened without a sense of repetition, but made fat with fatness in the dust, my wide hips in the dust, and I reached between my legs, and I wallowed, and I bathed in the heavy water, my throne, my sweet light, my substance. This Tsar did many good things, though he was no father. By the end of the 1960s, I started to do these big books, assemblages, anthologies, that I'll be talking about tomorrow morning. And that went around the world, Asia, America, Africa, Oceania, Europe. And at the same time, towards the end of that, I began to explore, I said, ancestral sources of my own in a world of Jewish mystics, thieves, and madmen. So I'll read the opening poem of a book called Poland, 1931, an attempt to write an ancestral poetry. I mean, some of these poems I know practically by heart. So. Poland, 1931, The Wedding. My mind is stuffed with tablecloth and with rings, but my mind is dreaming of Poland, stuffed with Poland, brought in the imagination to a black wedding, a naked bridegroom hovering above his naked bride. Mad Poland, how terrible thy Jews at weddings, thy synagogues with camphor smells and almonds, thy thermos bottles, thy electric fogs, thy braided armpits, thy underwear alive with roots. Oh, Poland, 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 how thy bells wrapped in their flowers toll, how they do offer up their tongues to kiss the moon, old mother stuck in thy sky, thyself an old bell with no tongue, a lost udder. O Poland, thy beer is ever made of rotting bread, thy silks are linens merely, thy tradesmen dance at weddings where fanatic grooms still dream of bridesmaids, still are screaming past their red mustaches. Poland, we have lain awake in thy soft arms forever, thy feathers have been balm to us, thy pillows capture us like sickly wombs and guard us. Let us sail through thy fierce weddings, Poland. Let us tread thy markets where thy sausages grow ripe and full. Let us bite thy peppercorns. Let thy oxen's dung be sugar to thy dying Jews. O Poland, O sweet, resourceful, restless Poland. O Poland of the saints, unbuttoned Poland, repeating endlessly the triple names of Mary. Poland, 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 have we not tired of thee, Poland? No, for thy cheeses shall never tire us, nor the honey of thy goats. Thy grooms shall work ferociously upon their looming brides, shall bring forth executioners, shall stand like kings inside thy doorways, shall throw their arms around thy lintels, Poland, and begin to grow. In the early 70s, Diane and I and our son, who was very young at the time, began to spend time and then to live at a Seneca Indian reservation in western New York State. And from that came a book called A Seneca Journal. So I'm going to read the opening couple of sections of Seneca Journal, and then a poem in translation from a friendship song that was composed by a man named Johnson Jimerson. The Seneca song has just a couple of words. One is in Seneca, one word is in Seneca, which means I want, and the other is in English, 5-cent cigar. If you remember, whatever that American president was in the 19th century who said, what this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar. So, Johnson Jimerson knew that and was incorporated into the song, plus other sounds. And the opening of Seneca Journal, well, the opening is it's a little description of where it comes from. It's called The Song of Beavers. I became a beaver in 1968. You understand the clan system. I was adopted by Richard Johnny John into the beaver clan. I became a beaver in 1968. Richard Johnny John was my father. The ceremony took place in the longhouse and was very brief. They said some words in Seneca. I got a new name. I didn't know if they were serious, but the name was great. My wife and son became blue herons. She was called the one who travels. He was called the talker. My wife's sister was Thelma Letzum, and her mother was Effie Johnson. I got interested in beavers 4 years later when we went to live in Salamanca. Salamanca is a railroad town right on the reservation. I saw it once on a German map of America that omitted Albany, the capital of New York. The population now is 7,000 and is mostly white. Charles Olson wrote, "History is the new localism." And Ezra Pound, "An epic is a poem including history. When I die, my name goes back to where it came from. A Seneca will come for it." So it begins with a poem of beavers. And I mentioned in this someone out of Jewish lore and legend and history called the Baal Shem, the master of the name or the master of the good name, who in the 18th century, like St. Francis before and other European saintly figures like that, went into the wilderness to learn there the language and speech of animals and plants. Seneca Journal 1, a poem of beavers. In dream, the beavers come to Harry Watt. A child could speak communication. We're standing in a row. They said I would not harm them, would not ever after hunted mink and badger, but the beavers were my friends and helped me. So his story began, and I knew it. Also, hearing what he said, I knew it was with me from before my time, and knew it as a memory of my own grandfathers, not as hunters in the woods, but on the edge of old world forests. Men and women walked by on the way to markets, public baths went burying in summer, chased by wolves in winter, past the huts where mushrooms hung to dry. The old women of the woods lived, heavy in gray dresses, chin hairs bristling into Gentile beards, their own familiar dogs and cats beside them. Had the master of the good name learned from these the speech of animals? This is the secret. All men have retained that greater language of what biological fellowhood will open to us once again. Ethology, the visions of McClure and Chomsky, all the speakers of deep tongues point a route this generation will be privileged to assume, a universal speech in which the kingdoms of the world are one. The kingdoms of the world are one. What is it to be a beaver, truly? When I think of it, I think of water on a body, holy hair. I think of beaver hats and beaver movies. I think of a new birth into beaver life. The beaver in the poem of the Baal Shem is being born. He is the generative part of man, the cock and hair, that low intelligence erupting changes what we are, the soft becoming hard, the cold one hot red tongue of beaver in a nest of fur, by a sudden metamorphosis, a fluid world becoming anything the mind can think. The mind is thinking, entering the fluid bottom stream of sex transformed. The Baal Shem leaves the light of Torah and becomes any old animal inside the sacred wood. Old Man Beaver's blessing song. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho. All I want's a good 5-cent cigar. Hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho, hee-hee-ho. All I want. Good. 5-cent cigar. Hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-haw. Old Man Beaver's blessing song. Now a special request from Paul Portuguese and from my wife Diane to read all or part of a longish poem called Cockboy. And it's spelled C-O-K-B-O-Y. And there's a story behind that too, that there was a great South American poet, Vicente Huidobro, who at the beginning of the 20th century wrote a poem, not in Spanish but in French, which he called, well, I think he meant to call it Cowboy, but the way it came out in the first edition was Cockboy. So this was in my mind for a long time. But I was thinking about, about other things, about shamans and tricksters and, and the state of America at the time and probably thereafter. So it's about all of that, and because I'd come out of writing Poland in 1931, the ancestral poetry. It is what it is. Cockboy. Saddle sore I came, a Jew among the Indians. What am I doing in this strange place with these people with strange eyes? Could be it's trouble, could be, he says, a shadow ariseth from his buckwheat, has his tomahawk in hand, shadow of an axe inside his right eye, of a fountain pen inside his left. What am I doing here? How was I lost to get here? I'm 100 men, 150 different shadows, Jews and Gentiles, who bring the law to wilderness. He says, this man is me, my grandfather, and other men of letters, men with letters carrying the mail, Lithuanian Pony Express riders, the financially crazed Buffalo Bill, still riding in the lead, hours before avenging the death of Custer, making the first 3D movie of those wars, or years before it, the numbers vanishing in Kabbalistic time that brings all men together, and the lonely rider, saddle sore, is me, my grandfather, and other men of letters, Jews and Gentiles, entering the domain of Indian, who bring the law to wilderness and gold mines and shaky stores, the fur trade, heavy agriculture, ballots, bullets, barbers who threaten my beard, your hair, but patronize me and will make our kind the senator from Arizona, the champion of their law, who hates us both, but dresses as a Jew one day, an Indian, the next a little Christian schmuck. What am I doing here? This place is maybe crazy, as all the letters going backwards, he says. So who can read the signboards to the desert? Who can shake his way out of the woods, ford streams the grandmothers were living near with stakes inside their cunts' teeth, maybe chainsaws? When the Baal Shem visited America, he wore a strimal. The locals all thought he was a cowboy, maybe from Mexico. A cockboy? No, a cowboy. I will be more than a credit to my community and race, but will search for my brother Esau among these red men. Their nocturnal fires I will share. Piss strain from my holy cock will bear seed of Adonai and feed them visions. I will fill full a clamshell, will pass it around from mouth to mouth. We will watch the moon rise through each other's eyes, the distances vanishing in Kabbalistic time. He says, the old man watches from the cliffs, a city overcome with light, the man and the city disappear. He looks and sees another city. This one is made of glass. Inside the buildings stand immobile statues, brown-skinned faces catch the light. An elevator moving up and down in the vision of the Kunanele, Kuna shaman, the vision of my grandfather, vision of the Baal Shem in America, the slaves in steerage. What have they seen in common? By what light their eyes have opened into stars? I wouldn't know what I was doing here. This place has all the letters going backwards, a reverse in time toward wilderness. The old Jew strains at his gabardine. It parts for him. His spirit rushes up the mountainside and meets an eagle. No, an eagle. Captains, commanders, darlings, delicious madmen, murderers opening the continent up to exploitation. Cease and desist, he says. Let's speak, he says. Feels like a little gas down here, he says. Can't face the mirror without crying. And the eagle lifts him like an elevator to a safe place above the sunrise. There gives a song to him, the Baal Shem song, repeated without words for centuries. Hey, heya, heya, but translates it as yabba baba baba bum. When the Baal Shem Yabba learns to do a bundle, what does the Baal Shem Baba put into the bundle? Silk of his prayer shawl bag beneath, cover of beaver skin above, savor of estrog fruit within, horn of a mountain goat between, feather of dove around its sides, clove of a Polish garlic at its heart. He wears when traveling and journeys through Kabbalistic forests, cavalry of the Tsars on every side, men with fat mustaches, yellow eyes, and sabers who stalk the gentle soul at night through the Wyoming steppes. He says, "What am I doing here? I could not find mine hat." Would search the countryside on hands and knees until behind a rock in Cody, old Indian steps forth. The prophecies of both join at this point. Like smoke, a pipe is held between them, dribbles through their lips the keen tobacco. Cowboy, cockboy, says the Baal Shem, places a walnut in his handkerchief and cracks it on a boulder each one eats. The Indian draws forth a deck of cards and shuffles. Game, they play at wolves and lambs. The fire crackles in the Pripyat in a large tent somewhere in America. The story of the coming forth begins. Well, there's a second part to it, but I think I moved up into some other.
Oh, no, that's that part. I like.
Oh, you like that part. Paul likes that part. I'm nothing but generous. Part 2, the emergence. Comes a brown wind curling from tense tissue sphincter, opened over the whole continental divide and shot the people up. Plop, plop, a little girl emergeth. She with the beaver tits, nose, furry eyes of the red man's Sabbath, gropes down the corridor, says, "Hello, doctor, got a hand to spare?" Doctor says, "Okay." Hand up her bush, she pulls a baby howling in lamplight, a little Moses. Now the cacique's daughter laugheth. "Oh, doctor, not so, oh, hard. So hard America is born. So hard the Baal Shem dreams about it." 200 years later in Vitebsk, he was in correspondence with William Blake, appeared on Peckham Rye, yes, fully clothed, and was his angel. "Angel," says his mother, smiling proud. She sees his little foot break through her crotch and itching races up her ribs. America is born. The Baal Shem is a beaver. Happened while the Indian talked, chanted behind Cody. The mad Jew slid to life past pink styrofoam snow of her bodies, channels the freaky passageways, unlit, unloved, like gums of an old woman. Teeth were ripped from ages gone. Into another kind of world. He hurtles, does reawaken in the female swamp, a beaver amongst the rushes. "Mama," calls the Baal Shem. "Mamala, what am I doing here? I have become my beard," he says. The blind world shines on him. Water runs through his mouth, down belly, it is dark, a darkness, fur is dark, and hides the skin and blood. A universal fur, but leaves one hole to open from the body's darkness, pushing into light, erupts like great cock of the primal beings, red and smooth like copper of the sun's red eye at night. Old beaver lugs it in his hand. I am myself, my grandfather, he sings. My name is Cockboy. Cockboy, understand? I leave my grandmother in the female swamp, will be the great deliverer someday. Yabba-ba-ba-bum. Might even find a jar of honey, might stick my prick in, my prick might tingle. Might it not tickle me? The bees find out about it and sting the knob. It grows a second, a dozen or so knobs. Along its length are maybe 30 knobs. So what's the use, I ask? Maybe we'll try again. I drag it red and sore behind me. So vulnerable I have become in this hot climate, shitting and farting, shooting marbles, was opening my mouth and coming in it. The blackbird shit, so not so fast, love into my hat. My eyes turn white, wood lilies are growing from them. A Slavic birth I can't deny, so tender in my eyes, tender. The native turds come floating, and across America in an outrage, uselessly I shout against the sun. You are no longer my father. Moon, you are no longer my mother. I have left you, have gone out jaunty with cock slung over shoulder. This is the journey your young men will take, says Beaver. Makes it to the hut where that old woman lives, apron over her belly, carp in oven, maybe fried bread, fat, fat. Little mother, don't mind if I drop a stone onto your brains. Your daughters be back later. Little hot girls I ride on pretending I was you. I suck their ears and scream, oh, put me lower down, love, oh, my cock inside. And have to cool it. I cool it in waters where a princess, daughter of a chief, went bathing. Lethal and innocent, the cock has found its mark. His train has reached Topeka. Custer is dead and enters the bridegroom's quarters. Darkness, her flesh prepared for it by new moon. In her abdomen, a sliver grows, a silver dollar over Barstow, lighting the marriage of America in Kabbalistic time. Says Cockboy, you are the daughter of the mountain. Now will I take thee to my father's tribe to do the snake dance. O Jewish feet of El, go crazy in his mind. O El, O him, I carry in my knapsack dirty pictures, land grants, but further back her people gun for him. How should they feel seeing their daughter in arms of Cockboy? C-O-C-K. Understand? Thou art become my father's bride, are wedded to Ugh, Christian God forever. Bye-bye, I gotta run now. Engagements await us in Salt Lake City. Industry riseth everywhere. Arrows strike concrete, never shall bruise my sweetie's flesh, says Cockboy. On horse of a river, he makes his way past mining camps. Polacks were panning gold in, and other pure products of America. Oh, prospectors, oh, Anglo-Saxons, baby-faced dumplings who pacified the West with Gatling guns, with bounties for hides of babes. Mothers' vulvas made baseballs to their lust. Oh, bringers of civilization, heroes, heroes, I will fight my way past you who guard the sacred border, last frontier village of my dreams, with shootouts, tyrannies, he cries, who had escaped the law or brought it with him. How was I lost to get here, was luckless on a mountain and kept from true entry to the west, true paradise, like Moses in the Rockies, who stares at California, spooky in the Jewish light of horns atop my head, great orange freeways of the mind. America disaster, America disaster, America disaster, America disaster, where he can watch the sun go down in desert. Cockboy asleep, they ask. Awake, cries Cockboy. Only his beard has left him, like his own, his grandfather's. Ghost of Ishi was waiting on the crest, looked like a Jew, but silent, was silent in America. Guess I got nothing left to say. You know, that last image, when I was writing this, of course, we were all reading Theodora Kroger's book on Ishi, the last of his tribe of Indians, who had been genocided. Everybody else had been put to death, killed. And Ishii survived and hid out in the woods here in California, for many years, and until he was discovered. He was naked. They put a kind of long coat around him. He's very gaunt. And in the photograph that was taken then, it looks like one of the survivors of Auschwitz and other places like that. And then curiously, his name Ishii, I mean, there's no significance to this, but his name Ishii in his language, Yana, means just person, man, human being. And the Hebrew word for man, person is ish. So anyway, Ghost of Ishii was waiting on the crest, looked like a Jew, but silent, was silent in America. Guess I got nothing left to say. But of course I did say some other things afterwards. I just gotten that far in the poem, and after the litany of America disasters, enough said.
And nothing's changed. Still the same America.
Yeah.
When did you write that? When did you write that?
When did I write that? At the beginning of the 70s. So, well, since I brought this, I think I will close with a couple of poems from another series called That Dada Strain. Dada was a great in-your-face, revolutionary art movement, began in the middle of the First World War. So there's a sense of also that's Europe disaster, right? There's that sense. That Dada Strain is the title, of course, which nobody recognizes but me and one old German poet who knew it from old jazz recordings. That Dada Strain, although it sounds like it's about Dada, is a jazz tune from the 1920s. Wonderful recording still by Ethel Merman if you want to catch it. But here, out of context, that Dada Strain, poems addressed to the Dada poets. One of their innovations was to create a poetry without words, a sound poetry. So I'm going to read or perform the opening poem of that Dada Strain, and then a poem without words by one of the Dada poets from 1916, Zurich, Switzerland, where they set up a place called the Cabaret Voltaire, and that was the beginning of Dada. And it had an influence outside of its own time into my time as well. So his name was Hugo Ball. He had seen a little of the First World War. After the hijinks of the Dada time in Zurich, he ran off into the mountains of Switzerland to die there as a kind of Catholic Dada saint, Hugo Ball. That Dada Strain, the zigzag mothers of the gods of science, the lunatic, fixed stars and pharmacies, fathers who left the tents of anarchism unguarded, the Arctic bones strung out on Saint-Germain like tom-toms, living light bulbs, aphrodisia. Art is junk, the urinal says. Dig a hole and swim in it. A message from the grim computer. Ye are hamburgers. June 23rd, 1916. For that evening's reading, he had made himself a special costume. His legs were in a shiny blue cylinder which reached up to his hips so that he looked like an obelisk. Over it he wore a huge coat collar cut out of cardboard, scarlet on the inside, gold on the outside. It was fastened at the neck in such a way that he could give the impression of wing-like movements by raising and lowering his elbows. He also wore a high blue and white striped witch doctor's hat. Caravana! Io elefanto pambla, o falibambla, Cosiga mpa apla orem, egiga coramen, higo, laiko, rusula, uyu, holaka, holala, blagobung, blagobung, bo so fataka. Shamparula, vusa, olobo, tatagorem, eshige, tsumbada, vulubu, subudu, ulu, subudu, tumba, ba, kusa, gauma, bao. A glass tube ecstasy for Hugo Ball. A glass tube for my lay, says Hugo Ball. My hat, a cylinder in blue and white. The night, the German ostriches, the sink he pisses in, all these become his world, his Dada song, begun there, holds the image until it comes at us. The image from its cross looks down a ribbon, a revolver, mud. These contribute to his death, also to what his death contributes later, to hysterical, to sick with God and time. A carousel. A roasted poet fish, the queen says to his mind, and enters where the street of mirrors starts. She sees his face reflected in hunger of the world as pain, the consciousness of death, not why we die, but why we dream about it, and why our dreams can't save the dying remnant. Hugo, as I write this poem, the voice cries from a further room. The dancer, singer calls me from a further room. I step into an obelisk below the waist. My mouth opens to sing, but freezes shut in grief for you. Umbula, take, bitly, sodankola, the collapse of language. Tabla, tuta, tuta, takabala, taka, tak. A glass tube ecstasy escapes from time. Babula, umbalam, the image and the word over your bed hang crucified. Again, the cabaret explodes. Again, fatigue, 1 foot in glass, a glass nerve, and a priestly gas pump pulls her hair out. And I think I will conclude with at least one poem from the 21st century, where I've really been writing a lot of poems, but I decided to read Cockboy, and that takes up a good part of the reading. So I will read for you my first poem of the 21st century. It's from a book called A Book of Witness, and there's 100 poems in it, so that's a century of poems, 100 poems. And the first 50, as it turns out, this was not planned in advance, the first 50 were written at the end of the 20th century, and the next 50 were written at the beginning of the 21st century. And so I'll read you the first poem. And the 21st century came to us in Southern California, down north of San Diego, and it was different from other New Years, that I remember from the Northeast. It was a nice, warm first day of 2012. and we have been watching futuristic movies, of what perhaps the 21st century might be like, but who knew? I come into the new world. Voices are dumb until I speak for them. Knowing the sound, I find myself between two fires. One is dark green, one the color of my mind asleep. I come into the new world where the thought of death no longer rankles. It will be good to be a stranger always, to know the terms by which we visit back and forth and sideways. In the morning I will wear a suit with shoulders big as boards. My clothes are silver plastic. When I step into the car, it starts to fly. I play games with children where I make a nose into an ear. Like a clock, my heart moves closer to the burning babe and stays there. I will now count the century by ones and twos. This morning, all the voices in my dream spoke with one voice. I feel privileged to be here among you. From now on, we will live on borrowed time. Thank you.
Other questions?
Questions?
You're stunned.
Yeah, do you know?
Silence.
Yeah, do you know the last words of Gertrude Stein? Of course, everybody knows who Gertrude Stein is. Great American experimental poet and fiction writer of the 20th century. She was taken into a hospital for an exploratory operation. It was suspected that she had some terrible form of cancer. And she came out of it and looked around and said to the people who were at her bedside, well, what is the answer? And nobody said anything because it was very bad. And she said, then what is the question? Thank you.